In Genesis 37, we move into the story of Joseph, Jacob's son. His 10 older brothers couldn't stand him because he was his father's favorite. And his father also used him to bring back word about his brothers, and he would bring back his honest word, and would be, if it was a bad report about them, that made them even more angry. But then Joseph started having prophetic dreams. In one, they were binding sheaves in the field, and his sheaf stood up erect, and the other sheaves of his brothers bowed down to him. And in another, the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. Now, this second dream displeased even his father, and his father knew exactly what was meant by it, which was that he and Joseph's mother, which I presume is one of his stepmothers, because his actual mother, was dead by this time. Shall I, your mother, and brothers really bow down to you? But then it notes that his father kept this saying in mind. He didn't forget about the dream. So his brothers hated him, and one day when his father sent him to them to see how they were doing, they saw him coming and said, "Let's kill him." His oldest brother, Reuben, didn't want that to happen. They said, "Let's kill him and throw him in a pit." And Reuben said, "Let's not kill him, let's just put him in the pit." And Reuben's intent was to come back later and rescue Joseph and take him back to his father. So they stripped his many-colored coat off, the one his father had given him, which is considered by many to be a symbol of his being selected to be the head of the family. They stripped that off of him and threw him in the pit. So with Joseph in the pit, they sat down to eat, probably far enough away where they couldn't hear him. It doesn't say it here, but in a later chapter we find out Joseph actually cried out for mercy and they wouldn't listen. So the brothers saw some Ishmaelite traders coming by, and Judah got the idea, let's sell him. Let's not kill him, let's sell him. So that was their plan. But while they were planning, Midianite traders came by. Now Midian was another son of Abraham after Isaac. They came by and they drew Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And he was taken down to Egypt. So Reuben went back to the pit and found Joseph wasn't there anymore. He was very upset because he wanted to save Joseph. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone." So that's when they took the robe, killed a goat, and put the goat's blood on the coat. And they took it to their father and said, "Is this your son's coat?" So Jacob got the worst payback yet for his own habits of deceit, and got this deceit from 10 of his children about his favorite son. Interestingly, in verse 35, it says, "All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him." We only know about Dinah, but perhaps he has more daughters that we don't know about, or it could be granddaughters. But Jacob refused to be comforted. He said, basically, "I'll keep mourning for my son until I die." But Joseph was alive, and he was sold to the captain of the guard, Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh in Egypt. Little did any of them know that all of this was happening to Joseph to drive forward to fulfill the prophecies of Joseph's dreams. Genesis 38 is about Judah and his family, how he has children with his daughter-in-law. Nothing really prophetic in that chapter. It's just important to note that the son of Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar, Perez, ends up being an ancestor of King David and ultimately an ancestor of Jesus. Meanwhile, in Genesis 39, Joseph is a huge success in Potiphar's house. Potiphar finds that everything Joseph does works out, and Potiphar puts him in charge of everything, and Potiphar doesn't have to care about anything because Joseph manages his house so well. There's only one problem in Potiphar's house for Joseph, and that's Potiphar's wife. See, Joseph seems to have inherited his mother's good looks, and Potiphar's wife decided she wanted him, and he rejected her. He said, "How could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And she persisted and persisted and persisted until finally one day she accused him of rape or attempted rape, and Potiphar put him in prison. And you might ask, if he thought Joseph tried to rape his wife, why wouldn't he have him killed? Well, it's possible Potiphar knew what his wife was like, but to save face, he had to put Joseph in the prison. We don't know, it doesn't say. In the prison, Joseph thrives just as well as he thrived in Potiphar's house. As the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of everything, and Joseph did well, despite the fact that he was in prison. Joseph getting down to Egypt may be the beginning of the fulfillment of the 400 years in Egypt prophecy. That's something to look at a later date. In Genesis 40, we see that prophetic dreams come back into the picture. Two of Joseph's fellow prisoners have dreams, and he tells them what they mean, that one of them will be forgiven while the other will be executed. To the one who was going to be forgiven, Joseph said, please put in a good word for me because I haven't done anything to deserve to be in this prison. But the man who was Pharaoh's chief cupbearer didn't say anything. But it happened to these two men just as Joseph said it would. But 2 years later, Pharaoh had prophetic dreams. And then the cupbearer remembered, there's a guy in the prison who might be able to tell you what they mean. So he's brought before Pharaoh, and he says, the interpretation isn't in me, but God will give Pharaoh the interpretation. And the interpretation was 7 years of great plenty are coming, followed by 7 years of great famine. And Joseph doesn't just say that, he also gives Pharaoh a plan for how to deal with it, which is basically store away 20% of the produce of the land of Egypt over the 7 years of plenty to be used for the 7 years of famine. And then Pharaoh says, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? So since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh made Joseph ruler over the whole land, and only in the throne was he greater than Joseph. And this is foreshadowing of Jesus. Jesus said after his resurrection, all power and authority is given to me in heaven and on earth. Joseph is one of the strongest types of Christ in the entire Old Testament. So Pharaoh had Joseph ride right behind him in the second chariot. As they were riding, people would call out before him, bow the knee. We've heard about people bowing down to Joseph before in his dreams. And Joseph was 30 years old at this time. Another similarity he has with Jesus, who was 30 when he began his ministry. Pharaoh gave him a wife, and he had 2 sons before the famine hit, Ephraim and Manasseh. So over the 7 years of plenty, they store the grain just as Joseph had said, and then the famine hits, and people have to come to Joseph to buy grain.